All right. Well, did the media swallow a whole load of crap and try to pass it on to you about the U.S. Involvement in the Nord Stream pipeline? Seymour Hersh, journalist who has been covering this extensively, says this is exactly what happened, that indeed the CIA and German intelligence created this whole hogwash cover story and handed it to the media, double spaced, just exactly what they wanted you to ingest, and that the media ran with it. Here is the report that is out today. Now, remember, in February, Hersh published this bombshell report accusing President Joe Biden of personally ordering the attack on the Nord Stream pipeline, which was a gas source from Russia that was set to deliver affordable energy to Germany and all of Europe. A few highlights from that piece. He said that the U.S. had worked with Norway and used the Navy in order to subvert congressional approval. We've covered this extensively. We believe it's very credible, and it absolutely makes a ton of sense, especially when you recall that the U.S. warned that it would not allow the pipeline to go forward. And then the same U.S. official, Victoria Nuland, who said that, did a victory lap about it after it was destroyed. Watch.
Senator Cruz, like you, I am, and I think the administration is very gratified to know that Nord Stream 2 is now, as you like to say, a hunk of metal at the bottom of the sea.
Yeah, high five about that.
The largest
it was a biological disaster.
Yeah, not a and it was a terrorist attack. It was the largest ecological terrorist attack in world history. And we're okay with that. The green administration of the Biden administration that cares a lot about CO2 emissions and everything else, was really concerned about the large amounts of natural gas and methane that they just put into the atmosphere.
Right. It's such a comical clip because she's like, I'm glad that incidentally happened.
Yeah.
I don't know how it did.
How'd that happen?
But wow, that really worked in my favor. Now, the Hersh report was widely reported abroad, but deliberately ignored by the U.S. media. In fact, when German Chancellor Olaf Scholz visited the U.S. a few weeks ago, the media didn't even ask him about it, even though Germany was to be the recipient of oil from the pipeline. And the Hersh piece says the U.S. didn't want Germany to have affordable energy because it is part of a concerted effort to hurt the German economy. You would think Germany would at least have a stance on that, or want to investigate or something. But instead, all CNN did was ask Chancellor Scholz about the war in Ukraine.
It is very difficult to judge what will be the next things to happen in Ukraine, but there is something which is absolutely clear. We will continue to support Ukraine with financial, humanitarian aid, but also with weapons.
But if this continues for years, Ukraine as a country will be destroyed. Its economy is already down 40-50%, depending on what estimate you look at. Is there a point at which you have to start negotiations, and is there a deal to be had where Ukraine gets some kind of security guarantees from NATO, perhaps EU membership, and in return it accepts the reality that it is not getting Crimea back, it is perhaps not getting some parts of the Donbass back?
There will be no decisions without the Ukrainians. We will not take decisions instead of them. We support them.
But should they? Would you encourage them to take these decisions?
So we told them that they can go for membership in the European Union, and they are working to make progress in all the criteria that are important for this. I think they know that we are ready to organize a certain way of security guarantee for the country in times of peace to come, but we are not there yet. And to my view, it is necessary that Putin understands that he will not succeed with his invasion and his imperialistic aggression, and that he has to withdraw troops. This is the basis for talks. And if you look at the proposals of the Ukrainians, it's easy to understand they are ready for peace, but there must be something done, and this has to be done by Putin.
All right. So he's echoing all the talking points of President Biden, even though there must be a seed planted in his head that, wow, this guy Biden, he may not have my best interests at heart and the interests of the German people. But he's willing to go on American media and regurgitate all of the Biden administration's talking points, including by saying, yes, my people in Germany are hurting from high energy prices, and we're cool with that because it's okay to tank my own economy to support this war. Now, here is a summary from Hersh's piece about just how much it has hurt the German and European economy to not have this oil that they had intended. This is from a source called named Sarah Miller, an energy expert and an editor at Energy Intelligence. The quote says, the destruction of the Nord Stream pipelines in September led to a further surge of natural gas prices that were already 6 or more times pre-crisis levels. Nord Stream was blown up in late September. German gas imports peaked a month later in October at 10 times pre-crisis levels. Electricity prices across Europe were pulled up and governments spent as much as 800 billion euros by some estimates, shielding households and businesses from the impact. Gas prices, reflecting the mild winter in Europe, have now fallen back to roughly a quarter of the October peak, but they're still between 2 and 3 times pre-crisis levels and are more than 3 times current U.S. rates. Over the last year, German and other European manufacturers closed the most energy-intensive operations, such as fertilizer and glass production, and it's unclear when, if ever, those plants will reopen. Europe is scrambling to get solar and wind capacity in place, but it may not come soon enough to save large chunks of German industry. And by many accounts, solar and wind will never replace that level of industry. The calculations just don't really work. To which no one asked Chancellor Scholz about that affordable energy that they were planning on. And we knew at the time during that visit a few weeks ago that this was intentional. They did not allow any free-form questioning. The president and the chancellor didn't stand side by side and ask questions the way that we saw just this week President Putin and President Xi do. They will do that with with Justin Trudeau when Biden goes to see him later. They did do that with the president of Mexico, but this one, no, is totally tight-lipped for a reason. But discussions of the pipeline did actually happen in private. Here's what he said, is that after this meeting with CNN, it was known that the chancellor had flown to Washington with no members of the German press, no formal dinner, and the two world leaders were not slated to conduct a press conference, as routinely happens in such high-profile meetings. Instead, it was reported that Biden and Scholz had an 80-minute meeting with no aides present for much of the time. There have been no statements or written understandings made public since then by either government, but this is Hersh talking. He says, I was told by someone with access to diplomatic intelligence that there was a discussion of the pipeline expose, and as a result, certain elements in the Central Intelligence Agency were asked to prepare a cover story in collaboration with German intelligence that would provide the American and German press with an alternate version of the destruction of Nord Stream 2. In other words, in the words of the intelligence community, the agency was to pulse the system in an effort to discount the claim that Biden himself had ordered the pipeline destruction.
Pulse the system, pump it with garbage, pump out a fake story.
Poop out a disinformation.
And of course, then, I know you might get to it, but then, there you go. And I was going to say, then we saw this right away, right from both the German press and the American press.
Right. So right on cue, the media acted like a good dog and picked up the bone that they were given and went with this story in the New York Times on March 8th. Intelligence suggests pro-Ukrainian group sabotage pipelines, U.S. officials say. Now, a lot of us saw right through this at the time. Philip said, how can we not know who it is but know their ideology? Right? That's strange.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I thought that was a really good point. This person likes strawberry ice cream. Who is it? I don't know.
But we don't know who that person is.
But somebody.
But you just know they like strawberry ice cream.
Right.
They're pro-Ukrainian?
Yes.
AKA the CIA?
Now, a source admitted that this was a false flag story to Seymour Hersh. This source says it was a total fabrication by American intelligence that was passed along to the Germans and aimed at discrediting your story. This is someone saying this to Hersh, saying, yeah, you touched a nerve. We had to then work defense to distract the public from your truth bombs. The disinformation professionals inside the CIA, to which we know there are many, understand that a propaganda gambit can only work if those on receiving are desperate for a story that can diminish or displace an unwanted truth. So this is to say that the media themselves do not want to believe that the U.S. blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. They don't want to believe that. There's a cognitive dissonance there. He says the truth is that President Joe Biden authorized the destruction of the pipelines and will have a difficult time explaining away his actions as Germany and its Western European neighbors suffer as businesses are shuttered amid high day-to-day energy costs. And it seems that the reporters from the Times knew this, at least one of the reporters. There were 3 of them, one of them named Julian Barnes and 2 of them named Adam. So we're just going to call them Adam and Adam. That he went on a podcast, Julian Barnes, recently, and was asked about it by the host's name, Michael Barbaro. And here are the transcripts. And the reporter, Julian Barnes, is saying, in the beginning, this quote, he says, all those states we went through, did Russia do it? Did Ukraine do it? We were just hitting dead end after dead end. We weren't finding officials who were telling us that there was credible evidence pointing at a government. And so my colleagues, these Adam and Adam, we started asking a different question. Could this have been done by non-state actors? And the host is like, And he says, yeah, some group of individuals not working for the government. And the host feeds him this, like freelance saboteurs. Where did this new question take you? And he goes along saying, at the end, my initial thought that this could be pro-Russian saboteurs turned out to be wrong. We don't know why turns out to be wrong. We learned that it was most likely a pro-Ukrainian group, to which then later in the podcast, he concludes that, look, we know very little. This is mysterious to us, but also to the U.S. government officials that we spoke to. They know that the people involved were either Ukrainian or Russian or a mix, and they are not affiliated with the Ukrainian government. But we also know they're anti-Putin and pro-Ukraine. The host asks another question at the end. He says, well, the intelligence right now is saying that we're not. So while officials are telling us that the president of Ukraine and his advisors didn't know, we can't be certain that that's true. So he's saying here at first that he and his fellow reporters, Adam and Adam, came up with this idea that it was a non-state actor all on his own. Like, that was just our idea, that it maybe was not a government. And then later he admits, but it's the government that told me that it was not a government. And it was freelancers. Freelance pipeline blower-uppers.
You find them in the yellow pages.
Right. You can.
We need a pipeline blown up. What page is that?
Like they did a Google search, who blows up pipelines freelance?
Super Mario Brothers. Okay, let me call those guys, see if they can help.
Is the pipeline warp zone?
Right. It'll take you
to level 8.
It'll take you to level 4.
These are just not the actions of a Ukraine hating group. No way.
No, they're pro-Ukrainian.
Yes.
Yeah.
But can we just talk real quick about the handing of this? And by the way, former FBI 25-year veteran John D'Souza, who we had on the show, said that it was well known within the FBI and the intelligence community, if you want a story to get out, you fabricate it and you hand it first to the New York Times, and then the Washington Post, etc. But first is the New York Times. And who was the first to publish this garbage intelligence BS cover story?
Right.
The New York Times.
Yeah.
Right? And they handed it right to them. And then, of course, the Germans run their version of it like a few days later.
Yeah.
Confirming.
Well, remember,
it's unbelievable.
we have that interview with the CIA agent at the countdown in our countdown timer that talks about how for Cuba, they manufactured things to make people think there were, what do you say, babies dying in incubators or whatever. And it was completely fabricated. There was no truth to it whatsoever. They fed it to a newspaper, and that newspaper feeds it out to and then other media organizations pick it up. And that's how they spread this stuff. This is like CIA 101.
Pulsing the system, right? Pulsing the system.
But the difference, the difference in that, though, was what he was, I think it was John Stockton. What he was describing was like feeding it to the newspapers, and the newspapers didn't know. And so then other newspapers would pick up the story and run it, and that's how they did it. In this case, now the newspapers are complicit.
Yeah.
They know. They were just handed the story by the CIA. They don't even like pretend that they have like somebody in there feeding it to them. They just walk in with their CIA badges, hand them the script, and say, "There you go," and they run with it.
And they're like, "Cool, I don't have to report it now because you gave it to me."
Well, that's like what we covered here on the show last week with Dan, which is Operation Mockingbird is alive and well. And back then it was hidden. So the newsrooms didn't know that they were being fed garbage stories, right? They didn't know that Deep Throat was actually feeding them these stories, right? Or whatever. Now they're complicit and they're on the payroll and they're in the newsrooms with them.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
And I mean, I think as evidence for that, especially with like the Seymour Hersh story in the pipeline, that was like a month ago that New York Times published that, right? That where they found out that it was a pro-Ukrainian group.
Yeah.
Have they done any follow-up? Did they actually release? Did they release anything about who it was that did it?
No, I haven't seen any updates on this story.
Because they've stopped. They've stopped investigating because they didn't investigate to begin with.
Because there was no investigation, right?
Right.
Yeah.
There's no journalist covering this beat in that newsroom. They were just handed this
Well, and
story.
we also, thanks to the Twitter files, we saw how much money Twitter made, or the Twitter files that Twitter made from the government. Like, nobody's like, where did that money come from? What was it for? Oh, it's just for, work that we did.
Right. Censoring people. So the FBI felt because the work was pretty onerous that the FBI paid Twitter money to do that censoring. So, Seymour Hersh is the only journalist really fully doing this coverage.
And, these kind of stories are putting a fine point at the pivotal inflection point that we are at right now, because we know now, like most people accept that Iraq was based on a lie, that most wars have been based on a lie in the last 40 years. And then for some reason, we continue to swallow government narrative around the current situation because either you don't live in Europe and you don't care that they don't have affordable energy, or, you continue to want to have a Ukrainian flag in your bio because it fits this virtue signaling that you think that is important for your social avatar. But if we don't admit that previous wars are based on a lie and then we somehow think, oh, but this one probably isn't, then it's extreme naivete on our part. And then you're right, we're being complicit to not at least, at this point, the assumption should be that most things are lies.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. And, when we start to dig into these stories, we don't go in saying like, okay, where's the bullshit here? It just comes, comes to us.
Yeah. And we have to take a shower after all the bullshit. That's what we feel like. Thank you so much for watching this segment here at Redacted. We are live every day at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, trying to share the stories that the mainstream media will not cover. You should also come over and join our community of Redacted Rebels over at redacted.inc. That's our private locals community where we can share exclusive content that we simply cannot share here on YouTube. Come over and join the rebellion together right now by going to redacted.inc. We'll see you next time.